Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. We are back with the questions from Jurisprudence. Our first question for today is, give an example of legal norms adapting to social change. The legal recognition of same-sex marriage. How do social norms change over time? They shift with the cultural changes, such as changing attitudes toward smoking or gender roles. What was John Austin's contribution to analytical positivism? John Austin defined a law as a command from a sovereign backed by sanctions and emphasized the difference between positive law and a natural law. What is a major criticism of analytical positivism? It is criticized for being morally neutral and too formalistic, ignoring issues of justice and fairness. How does analytical positivism view legal authority? Legal authority comes from a legitimate sovereign of government which enacts and enforces law. Why are normative systems essential for social order? They provide clear behavioral guidelines and penalties for violations, reducing uncertainty and conflict. How do normative systems contribute to stability? By ensuring predictability and allowing individuals to understand expectations and consequences. How do normative systems evolve? They change over time to reflect their new societal values, beliefs, and circumstances. What academic fields study changes in normative systems? Jurisprudence and social philosophy. What is the core function of norms and normative systems? To provide behavioral standards and recognize them into a coherent framework governing society. How do legal norms ensure justice? By regulating societal behavior, resolving conflicts, and maintaining fairness through enforcement mechanisms. How does Austin define law? Law is a command issued by a sovereign authority backed by a threat of sanctions. What role does the sovereign play in Austin's theory? The sovereign is the highest authority whose commands must be obeyed by the people. What ensures compliance with the law in Austin's theory? Sanctions, like punishments or penalties, ensure compliance with the law. Does Austin believe law and morality are connected? No. Austin argues that law and morality are separate. A law is valid regardless of its moral content. What is the central principle of legal positivism in Austin's theory? Law is valid if it is created by a sovereign authority, not because it aligns with morality. What is one major criticism of Austin's theory? It is considered overly simplistic and it does not account for complex modern legal systems. How does Austin's theory address unjust laws? Austin's theory does not consider morality, so even unjust laws are valid if enacted by a legitimate authority. What is a normative system? A normative system is a set of rules or norms that guide and regulate behavior within a society or group. What does a normative system establish? A normative system establishes what is considered acceptable and unacceptable conduct, and it provides mechanisms for enforcement and a dispute resolution. How is law related to normative systems? Law is a specific type of normative system that governs the conduct of individuals and institutions within a society. Who creates, interprets, and enforces legal norms? Recognized authorities such as legislatures, courts, and a police create, interpret, and enforce legal norms. What are legal norms? Legal norms are formal, codified rules enforced by the state to regulate behavior. Or what do legal norms prescribe? They prescribe specific behaviors, including prohibitions, permissions, and duties. What happens if legal norms are violated? Violations lead to consequences such as sanctions or penalties. What are the main purposes of legal norms? They maintain public order, protect rights, and ensure justice. Why is Austin's strict separation of law and morality criticized? It can justify unjust laws such as those violating human rights. What is the role of sanctions in Austin's theory? Sanctions are necessary to enforce laws and ensure obedience. What is the difference between positive law and a natural law in Austin's theory? Positive law is enacted by a sovereign and enforced through sanctions, whereas natural law is based on moral or ethical principles. How are legal systems organized? Legal systems are organized hierarchically, where some norms have a greater authority than others. Which type of law has the highest authority in a legal system? Constitutional law has the highest authority. What are some levels in the hierarchy of legal norms? International law, constitutional law, statutory law, administrative regulations, and a case law. What is the primary focus of Kelson's pure theory of law? It focuses on law as a system of norms independent of morality, politics, or sociology. According to Kelson, what is the relationship between law and morality? Law and morality are separate. Laws are valid based on their formal characteristics, not their moral content. What is the hierarchy of norms in Kelson's theory? Lower norms derive their authority from higher norms, culminating in the ground norm. What is ground norm? Ground norm is the fundamental presupposed norm that legitimizes all other legal norms in a system. Who enforces legal norms? State institutions, primarily through the judicial system and law enforcement agencies. What are some common consequences for not following legal norms? Fines, imprisonment, or other penalties. How does law interact with other normative systems? It interacts with moral, religious, and social norms. What is an example of law incorporating moral values? Human rights and justice principles being part of legal frameworks. What happens when legal norms conflict with other norms? Legal systems must reconcile differences such as in moral debates on abortion or euthanasia. What role does law play in a social order? It regulates behavior, resolves conflicts, and it protects public interests. How does law balance individual freedom and collective welfare? By setting rules that ensure both their personal rights and societal stability. Why is law considered an evolving system? Law changes in response to social shifts, technological advances, and cultural changes. Why does Kelsen consider the ground norm hypothetical? It is assumed to be valid without question and is not derived from any other rule. How does Kelsen define legal validity? A law is valid if it aligns with the established procedures of the legal system, regardless of its moral correctness. What does Kelsen mean by the unity of law? Law is a unified system where norms are interrelated and derive legitimacy from the ground norm. What distinction does Kelsen make between norms and facts? Norms are rules of conduct, whereas facts are social realities. Legal theory should focus on norms. What are the main criticisms of Kelsen's theory? Critics argue it is too abstract and neglects social and moral aspects of law. The ground norm is seen as vague and unverifiable. What role do legal reforms play? They help a law adapt to contemporary challenges such as digital privacy and environmental protection. What is jurisprudence? Jurisprudence is the philosophy of law that examines the nature, function, and justification of legal norms.